Hi, I'm Nicole Purcell, and this is my Screencast lesson critique. So I'm just going to jump right into it, and we're going to start by focusing on these objectives. Okay, so according to this rubric, a rubric for assessing course objectives, I would rate these objectives at a 3. Okay, but let's go back and look at these, and you should notice that these enabling objectives are broader than the terminal objectives. And the terminal objectives are supposed to be more general. So what I would do is I would switch these out and I would make the terminal objectives the enabling and vice versa. So, and then I would put the terminal objectives where the enabling objectives were, okay? So now the new terminal objectives focus on the overall goals of the course, and the enabling objectives enable these objectives to be met. And I feel like the new enabling objectives need to be more specific. I would change them to these that I put right here. I'll go ahead and highlight these. And what is different is that I added situations that these objectives are going to be presented in. And this just makes the lesson more communicative, and the students are able to know how to use this type of language outside of the classroom. So my revised objectives reflect a communicative aim and make the lesson more authentic. Now, I believe that the lesson does lead to my revised objectives. Some activities need to be more authentic or relate more to real world situations and have a communicative aim in the classroom, like activities 2, 3, 4, and the closure. I believe if a situation was added to these activities, it would create a more authentic learning environment. The activities do follow a natural order. I like how they build upon one another. The student has to use knowledge from one activity to do the next. There is also a transition between teacher-driven and student-driven assignments that goes over very smoothly. The first few assignments, like the introduction and activity 1 and activity 2, they require a lot of instructor input, but as the activity progresses to a lot of group activity, in activity 3 and activity 4, and the closure, it is more student driven. And then the closure, of course, is a completely student driven activity that kind of shows each student's comprehension of the new knowledge that they learned. So I believe this lesson follows a presentation practice production format, because in the beginning, the new information is presented to them by the instructor, and then they practice individually and as in groups, and then they must create a production in the end of what they learned through the group presentation of a story. I would switch the second part of the introduction. I wouldn't switch them, but I would move this to the end of activity 1. I would keep this first part of the activity where it is, because small talk is a great introduction into the classroom, and it just warms the students up for speaking in the classroom. And now for activity 1, I would go over the handout first and kind of guide the students into what they're learning, because some students may need a little extra help looking at the handout or may be completely lost seeing these things for the first time. Okay, and then I would explain the worksheet and the situations these would be used in, and then let the students look at the information and seek in. So I would give the quiet time at the end of activity 1. I would also add a situation to the main activity at the end of the lesson. So in the closure activity, I would try and have the students make a comprehensible story, which would make the lesson more authentic, and have the students use this with real world application. Now I'm going to go through the motivation of each of these activities and show their educational value. Okay, so in the introduction, I believe the educational motivation for this activity is to provide a slow introduction into the complex information beforehand. So the instructor gives the students a warm-up and a review, and this lets the students get used to speaking in the classroom. And by letting the students review a simple worksheet, they can individually seek out things they do understand and have prior knowledge of. So the first part of the activity is communicative. And then the part that was the second part, it's not very communicative because the students are merely just looking at a handout. And no interaction is really taking place. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to activity 1. The educational motivation of this activity is to assist students in defining most of the idioms and to have them familiarize themselves with informal speech. This helps ensure comprehension of the new information. So the instructor is going over what is in the handout with the students, and this just gives the students a little more information and how to use the idioms and things of that nature. The activity is communicative because the instructor asks the students to any idioms that they are familiar with or have heard before, and this ties into the subject into real world application. Okay, so I'm going to go on to activity 2. The educational motivation for this activity is to have students learn how to properly use these idioms. An activity for the entire lesson is introduced, and this leads to the following activities. So activity 2 builds upon activity 3 and so forth. But the activity is not really communicative. I believe it doesn't relate to an authentic situation, but it is key in this lesson, and it allows the teacher to ensure comprehension of the subject. Okay, so now I'm going to go over activity 3. The educational motivation is to have students collaborate and practice proper use of idioms. It has the students help each other with comprehension, and it allows the students to become more precise in using idioms and sets them up for the elaboration that is coming in part B. But the activity isn't communicative. It doesn't relate idioms to the real world, and I believe the instructors should, give them a situation that the idiom should be used in, like conversation with friends or small talk with coworkers, to ensure the activity is authentic. And now in activity 4, the educational motivation is to have the class expand on their prior work and use the idioms to produce a product to present to everyone. And this allows the students to collaborate and create something together. The educational motivation is to have them work together to create a story, and it combines all the previous activities' knowledge, and it leads to the closure activity. But like the other activities, it doesn't really relate the idioms to the real world situation. Okay. And finally, the closure activity. The educational motivation is to combine all aspects of the lesson and have the students use their presentation skills to show their comprehension to the class and instructor. It is the last activity because the other activities were built upon this one. Okay, so the students are using the speaking skills and presentation skills that they might encounter in the real world. And this makes it communicative because there are many situations where the students are going to have to present things to people in English. And now the last two are the ending, are the last two of the closure. The educational motivation is to inform students what they will be learning in the next class. It allows the students to start thinking things they may know about the topic already. And it allows the students to know there's a contrast between what they learn today and what they are learning in the future. And it is communicative because formal language and informal language is used in the real world, and it's helping the students define that contrast and think of different situations they'd be able to use these types of languages in. And now the last one, the idiom homework. I said that it's listed below, but it's not. But I think the educational motivation for it is to have the students practice what they've learned outside of the classroom. And I don't know if it's communicative or not, but to make it communicative, it would have to have the students actively using the language in a real world situation outside of the classroom. It would not be communicative if students were only doing like a fill in the blank or homework of that nature. But if they were having to write a story or tell a story or something like that, it would make it communicative because that is a skill that is required outside of the classroom when learning a language.